Rang. Before we get started, as we like to do, we are going to go to our memory verse of the month. If you will, please recite this along with me. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Okay, we are in lesson 8 tonight, the first part of settling the land. And when I initially sat down to look at how we were going to divide and study this book, in my head, before actually looking at how the book was broken down and divided up, I was like, great, no problem. We're going to have lots of conquest conversations. But the reality is the conquest is only half the book. And the rest of it, for the most part, is land settlements, which can be a little drier, a little bit more tedious. So I thought, great, we're going to cover this in one lesson and we'll spread out the rest of it over other things. But really, when you dig down, there's a lot of stuff here. And so we're going to spend 2 lessons on settling the land. Specifically, this lesson tonight, there's a fair amount of narrative in it. And so we'll dig down and kind of look at the text and kind of what was going on at the time. Next week is really just this tribe went here, this tribe went here, this tribe went here. Here's how the land's divided up. And so it'll be a little bit more of that. But there will still be things to dig into and talk about, okay? The lessons thus far, I've had a final question in each one. I really haven't had a lot of time to get to that question. So I want to kind of summarize the book thus far and talk about the promises fulfilled that we've seen so far in the narratives, chapters 1 through 12. So what are some of the promises we've seen? JD.
So far, they've received the land of milk and honey.
Yes, the land that was promised in the days of Abraham, hundreds of years before. They're now there. They have it. They've been living off of it for the past 7 or so years, and they've really reaped the bounty of that. Great. Tim. Yeah, they're a great nation. They're finally settled, and they're capitalized, and they're not going to settle and become the nation as God intended them to be. Excellent. Anybody else? Matthew.
Joshua, no man would be able to stand against him. That's what we've seen.
Yeah, no man could stand up against him, promised in Joshua chapter 1. And we finally see that coming true. Stephen.
Rahab and her family were saved through their obligation and covenant they made.
Yeah, there was a promise made to Rahab that the people honored and fulfilled. Excellent. Miles.
Yeah, the half-tribe of Manasseh are allowed to return to them.
Yes. Yep. So Reuben and Gad and half of Manasseh promised that they would come across and fight, and when the fighting was over, they would return. We're going to talk about that in 2 weeks, I think, them actually returning. But this is the fulfillment of their obligations at this point that they promised to do, and now they're going to be allowed to go back. What about, these are all good promises that have come true. What about some of those maybe not bad promises or negative promises? Moses and Aaron did not go into the land because of their failure to give God the glory at the rock. Yeah. Matthew.
The nation was troubled because Achan took the cursed things.
Yes, they were promised that if they failed to follow God's law, that he was not going to stand with them and help them. And that came true at Ai with Achan. What else? Anybody have anything else? Okay. Let's start reading in chapter 13. I promise we are not going to read all of these chapters on settlements, but I do want to start out because there's a little bit of narrative here in some of these chapters, and so we will read some of this. Let's start on chapter 13 and verse 1. Now Joshua was old, advanced in years. After the Lord said to him, "You are old, advanced in years, and there remains very much land yet to be possessed. This is the land that yet remains, all the territory of the Philistines, and all that of the Gershites, from Sihor, which is east of Egypt, as far as the border of Ekron northward, which is counted as Canaanite. The 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazites, the Ashdodites, the Ashkelonites, the Gittites, and the Ekronites, also the Avites. From the south, all the land of the Canaanites, and Merah, which belongs to the Sidonians, as far as Aphek, to the border of the Amorites, the land of the Gibeonites, and all Lebanon, toward the sunrise, from Baal Gad, below Mount Hermon, as far as the entrance of Hamath. All the inhabitants of the mountains, from Lebanon, as far as the brook Mesrephoth, and all the Sidonians. Them I would drive out from before the children of Israel. Only divide it by lot to Israel as inheritance, as I've commanded you. Now, therefore, divide this land as an inheritance of the 9 tribes and half the tribe of Manasseh. Okay, so this map here, I like because it really identifies where those locations they have not yet conquered yet. So you'll see it mainly along the western coast. All the lighter green, I guess, is the territory that they have conquered thus far, but there's still quite a bit of territory that's left. So my question here, the first one we're going to talk about, why did God halt the conquest here? Is the conquest over? Maybe that's a better question. No, it's not. But the nation as a whole is no longer going to move forward in battle like they have thus far. Why the change? Steven?
I don't know if this is what you're going for, but it seems like he's giving Joshua relief. You know, he's not able to lead the entire country in battle like that anymore.
Yeah. He's gotten older, right? This has been 7 years. We don't know how old Joshua is here. There's some assumption, I think, by a lot of people that Caleb and Joshua are relatively similar aged. And if you go to chapter 14, we see that Caleb here is 85 years old. This is verse 10. That may be true. It may be that he's a little bit younger. He may be that he's a little bit older. We don't really know. But definitely Joshua here seems to be, while he's still leading the people, he's not leading it in the same way. He's going to be able to go and to farm and to prosper in his later years from his inheritance itself. Is the promise still there? The promise to drive out the nations? Yes, it's still applicable. JD?
Yeah, the promise is still there, but again, like was stated, with Joshua as advanced in years as he is, the time for fighting against these other nations, at least for the time being until a new leader can be chosen, so the time for fighting is over. For now, it is the time to rest, recover, and regain their strength, so that when that leader arises, they'll have their spears sharpened for the battle ahead.
Yes. Where are they at this point? Physically, where are they in the land? Chapter 14 and verse 6, they're in Gilgal. So they're back down at their main campsite, which is just next to Jericho, where they first came in and settled in the first place. Have they been occupying these cities they've been capturing up to this point? There's no indication that they have been. In fact, there's some indication they haven't. And we talked a little bit about this last week. In chapter 11, it specifically mentions that Joshua pushed the Anakim out into the land of the Philistines. And going to chapter 14, Caleb here is asking for Hebron, which is named Kirjath Arba, which is after the greatest man of the Anakim, verse 15. The Anakim have in some way come back into this land. So they've been moving around as a nation, capturing, fighting, but not occupying yet. And so the time is now ready to occupy, reestablish their control of the territories, and occupy those lands as God intended. Dorothy.
I have a question. I read, God is talking to Joshua starting verse 1, and all these places you haven't taken. And then in verse 6 it says, I think it's talking about all of those places. Then I will drive out from before the children of Israel. So is God going to do that?
So, yes, that's the same promise that was given in the beginning. God is going to be the one fighting for them and pushing them out. That does not mean that the Israelites didn't play a part. I think that the verses that we see in various places where let's go to chapter 15 and verse 63. As for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judah could not drive them out, but the Jebusites dwelled there with the children of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. So the Israelites now had a responsibility as individual small tribes to push them out. God was going to be on their side and fight for them. But the Israelites had to do that as small tribes now. And whether they did that or not was going to depend on their faith and whether they could do it. Chapter 15, Chapter 17, we see a complaint. We're going to talk about this at the end of the lesson if we get this far. There was concern amongst the tribes of Joseph that they couldn't drive out the inhabitants of the land because they had chariots, verse 16, chariots of iron. Have they fought chariots yet? Yeah, we talked about that last time. At Hazor, when all the nations of the north came together to fight, there were chariots there. But the faith of the tribes of Joshua struggled in that moment to fight back. And so therefore they were unable to take that territory fully as God had given it to them. He was still going to fight for them. But they needed to follow him, and there seems to be some difficulty following them up to this point. Excellent question. Stu.
This whole period, even when we get to the kingship, the monarchy, there's this really awkward, intense cohabitation of the land. Jerusalem, Jebusites weren't pushed out to King David. The Philistines didn't disappear for much longer after that. So there was still, even though they were pushing that, it was on a much smaller scale than what they had as a nation.
Yes, there's a transitionary period here where we are going from the nations fighting against Israel as a whole under a single leader to now we are having smaller battles with individual tribes or maybe a couple of tribes together fighting against the Canaanite nation underneath the leadership within that tribe. And it seems to be a really difficult period for the people. We talked about this in the Bible reading discussion when we were looking at Judges about how Israelites as a nation had up to this point followed a single person. They have followed Moses. Moses dies. They followed Joshua. And now they are having to turn towards tribal leaders, village leaders to help lead them. And they really struggle with that. Transitionary periods we know can be hard. We think about churches who are transitioning between elderships or between preachers. And sometimes that can be a difficult period until things kind of settle a little bit. This seems to be a really difficult period as we move from Joshua into Judges, into the days of the kings, until eventually we get to Solomon and David first, but then Solomon, who really successfully, at the best that Israel ever comes, to occupy the entirety of the territory. Not perfectly, but they're doing it better than anybody up to this point. Any other comments or thoughts on these things?
I think it's a highlight to what happens for the rest of the book, that you have these powerful leaders and prophets that come along and do great things, but after they leave, they're immediately forgotten about. You see it since the beginning here. Israel never really had their own faith. They just kind of followed wherever they had. And of course, there are people who did do well, but I think it's kind of a prelude for everything else that's going to come for the rest of the book. Is they just choose not. They don't choose to have their own faith.
Yeah, they do a really good job following when someone has a vision and viewpoint of where they need to be going, but they fall away when that person dies or moves on or whatever it is. Yeah, it's a struggle point throughout Israel. It's a hard thing for us too sometimes when we come to depend on people rather than depend on God. Yeah. Okay. Is the fact that there's still Canaanites in the land the fault of Joshua and a failure on his part? No. There's no indication of that anywhere. Joshua, in fact, in chapter 11, verse 15, as the Lord had commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone in all the Lord had commanded Moses. Joshua has done his part yet. But if you remember the promise to push out the people was never intended to happen all at once. That's been foretold to the people since Exodus. Exodus 23, 29, and 30. I will not drive them all out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you until you have increased and you inherit the land. And this has been reinforced in other places too. Joshua has done his job here. It's now the job of the tribes to take over and finish the work. Unfortunately, we see they struggle with that up to this point. Okay, let's talk about these tribes. It's mentioned here in verse 7, there's 9.5 tribes left to take their land. Who are the 12 sons of Israel? Pop quiz. You can shout them out. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, okay, Gad, Issachar, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, I heard Dan, what was that? Benjamin? Who? Naphtali, yep. And the other son? Joseph. Great, got them all. Checked them as we went. Okay, so these are the sons, because I knew I would not be able to keep up with that otherwise. So these are the 12 sons, and they become the foundation of the 12 tribes. But are these the 12 tribes? Why not? Okay, Joseph received the birthright, and so that was passed down to his 2 sons, which were Manasseh and Ephraim. Okay, so Joseph did not become a tribe himself, but Manasseh, his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, became tribes of themselves. Okay, who are the tribes who have the land thus far? On the east side of the Jordan. Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. Okay, so now we're down to 10.5 tribes. Okay, it's the east side of Manasseh. That's why I put it on the right side. Okay, so that's 10.5 tribes. Who's the other tribe who doesn't receive an inheritance? Levi, yes. Levi does not receive an inheritance. Why?
They got cities.
Okay, they got cities.
They were given the sacrifices of the Lord as their inheritance.
Yes, so if we go to verse 14, only to the tribe of Levi he had given no inheritance. The sacrifices of the Lord God of Israel made by fire after their inheritance are their inheritance, as he said to them. So God had set aside this tribe as a special tribe amongst all the tribes to have a special purpose, and that was to serve him specifically in the tabernacle, and then later the temple, and to have a number of jobs associated with that. That did not mean that he was not going to provide for them, right? We see in several places under the old law, for example, Deuteronomy 18, 1 and 2, the part of the offerings that were made were going to be sustenance for the priests. That was how they were going to receive some of their food. Numbers 18, 23, and 24, the tithes they were going to offer as heave offerings were going to be given to the Levites so they could sustain themselves somewhat monetarily. And then, as Stu said, they were going to be given cities throughout the land, and the common land around the cities were going to be places for them to farm and raise cattle and that sort of thing. And so God was still going to provide for them, but it was going to be different from the other tribes. There was going to be something special set aside for them. Okay. Anything on the Levites before we move on? Yes?
I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but Levi was set aside as the first fruits of the brothers, but he is not the first brother. Now Reuben sinned with Jacob's mating. But when Simeon sinned, he sinned with Levi.
Correct. So why is he set aside as special? Yeah. Who has an answer for that?
Because Levi was the one who was willing to be on God's side in the incident with the golden calf.
That's true. Okay, so the Levites at the incident of the golden calf joined with Moses and Aaron to fight against the rest of the Israelites and declare their loyalty to God. Maybe that was their reward. I don't know.
Levi kind of precipitated that.
Yeah, Aaron and Moses was a Levite too, as selected as the lead of the nation. Yeah, Anybody else have other thoughts? I don't know that answer, so JD?
Well, after they finally established themselves in the land of Canaan, claimed it as their own, the entire Levite tribe, to my knowledge, at least the men of the tribe, were raised and trained to be priests, religious leaders. So that kind of set apartness could be a contributing, if not the major factor into why Levi himself, a sort of plan established ahead of time.
Yes, so God obviously knows everything that's going to happen. Aaron was established as the first high priest. It was going to be through his lineage. I'm drawing a blank on the son's name. Yes, Eleazar. Thank you. Yep. Was going to be the subsequent high priest, and so we saw all those priests were coming through, and so God provided a way for them to live. Now, these cities, we're going to talk about this next week, are scattered all throughout the land. They're not in a congregated location. God placed these people who are in charge of leading the people religiously all throughout the land. Maybe as a reminder to the people so they could serve the people in this way. They're not just in a single location. We'll look at that next week. Okay, there are some things we need to remember as we're looking at these things. And there's maps in our Bibles and in various atlases, and you can look up maps all over. We're going to have some here today. Tribal placements on modern day maps are estimations, okay? It is really, really hard for us to know exactly where some of these boundaries are, okay? Some of them are not clear by our estimations and our understandings. For example, when we talk about Manasseh and Ephraim tonight, some of the cities of Ephraim are located within the tribal lands of Manasseh, and vice versa. Okay, and you see this also throughout a number of other places as well. Reuben had some cities in Gad, and vice versa. Is that because we didn't understand what was going on, or is that because we don't know where these cities are? Like, it's really hard for us to understand some of those things today. Some border markers just don't exist anymore, okay? In chapter 18 and verse 15, one of the landmarks for Benjamin is the well waters of Nephtoah, okay? For Naphtali, in 19 and verse 33, it's an oak tree for Naphtali. That's not there anymore. I'd be willing to bet that oak tree is not still there. And so when we're looking to find out where these border lines are, we're just, and sometimes guessing based on some of the information we're given. Some locations we haven't discovered, possibly yet, possibly never. Some of these cities, the names have been changed over the various centuries and millennia. Sometimes those cities just don't flat out exist anymore. And they haven't been rediscovered, or maybe they never will be. And so when we're looking at some of these cities that make boundary marks, sometimes we have an idea of where that's at, and sometimes we don't, okay? So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. That being said, that doesn't mean there's not value in studying these things. What are some of the things we can learn by studying where these tribes were?
Well, you can see the extent of the blessings that the Lord would give to them. You can also see His power as He is providing for them and guiding them as well. And just making it more real, where this isn't fiction, this isn't something that's not a make-believe place. These are real places, historical places. You can travel over there. There are still things being dug up. So it brings the text to life.
Yes, it gives us a better understanding of who they were. They were real people in real places, and to know how they lived. This land, we talked a little bit about the geography in the first lesson. This land shaped these people and who they become and who they fought later, and how they worked together and relationships they built with each other, but also the nations around them because of where they lived. And so it can make their lives very real for us. And I think you mentioned the providence of God and His blessings and us understanding how He cares for His people and He makes His promises true. When I was looking at these settlements, I kept coming back to Genesis 49 and the blessings of Jacob when he's on his deathbed, blessing the people, or his son specifically, and prophesying. A lot of these prophecies come true in these land settlements and seeing God's blessings and his foreshadowing and highlighting, these are things that are going to happen. And then they do come true. It can give us further strength in our faith and for the Bible and what God says to happen and how he says it's going to come to pass. We're going to talk about some of those things today and next week too. Ben.
It goes back to Genesis 12, those promises that God gave to Abraham, the land, nation, and the blessing promise. So, this shapes them, as you just said, and even today, there's still disagreements and there's still disputes about the land. And so, when we get to Joshua, I think 21, verse 43 and 44, he gave them all the land. None of the promises failed. So, it does shape the story of the Bible.
It does. Everything comes back to this land where they lived and the promises that were given to them. Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the territory itself. We're going to start by looking at the Transjordan tribes. The first one that we're going to talk about is Reuben. We're going into chapter 13 and verse 15 through 23 here. So this is where the tribe of Reuben was generally located. There's a gorge here to the south called the Arnon Gorge, and extends northward into Heshbon. South of this gorge is where Moab was. This land was really fertile. It was less rugged than this land to the south where the Moabites were. And so Moab came back and fought against them numerous times over this land. They wanted the better land. And so they came up and fought for it often. This was a fertile land that was suitable for raising sheep and wheat and barley. And we see when Reuben asked for this land, that's one thing they wanted for, is because it's really good pasture land for their livestock. Okay, there are some cities here. I don't know all these cities and how they play into. One that jumped out to me was Beth Peor. What happened at Peor? Y'all remember in the book of Numbers, I think? Yeah, so Balaam was there, and the Midianites were tempting Israel, and so the Israelites gave in, and they went after the women. And Eleazar went out and avenged God's side, stood up for God. You remember the man who brought the Midianite woman in front of his family, and Eleazar ran the sword through both of them. That happened in this location. So this is a city that's going to fall into the tribe of Reuben here at this point. Okay. This is the territory of Gad here. It's just to the north. It's really a nice, choice pastoral land. It's going to extend here from Heshbon up into the Jabbok River, which is right here. It flows into the Jordan River. And then you'll see a couple of these, I guess, little spikes of land here that come off to the east and west that we think are part of Gad. The land on the west along the Jordan River was really forested, especially north of the Jabbok River. Gad was subject to frequent raids by the Ammonites, the Moabites, and a lot of the desert tribes to the east, which is echoed in Genesis 49:19 in those blessings of Jacob we talked about. Jacob said, Gad, a troop shall trample upon him, but he shall be triumphant at last. And we see that throughout history, that this is a territory that was fought over by a number of tribes upon Gad. But out of the three tribes here on the east side, Gad is the one that stays under Israel's control more often than the half-tribe of Manasseh and Reuben. And so we see that the blessing of Gad being triumphant is borne out through what we see in the other pages of the Bible. North of that, we have some cities here. Some of these play into various Bible stories later. You have Succoth, you have Ramoth Gilead, you have Heshbon, and some of these play into different stories. And Jabbok. Okay, Manasseh here is to the north. This is, again, just half the tribe of Manasseh. Machir, the oldest son of Manasseh, is the sub-tribe that settles in this region here. The Amorites were displaced from living here. There's a number of, this was previously the the land of Og, so Bashan, and then half of Gilead was here as well. This appeared to be a small buffer zone between a couple of nations when Israel entered the land, and it later became named of Gilead. So you see a number of cities, Ramoth Gilead, Jabesh Gilead. It's referring to land in this region specifically. And again, a couple of cities that are mentioned in these pages here in verses 29 through 33. Okay. So let's move on to chapter 14. Unless someone has a question about the Transjordan tribes, we're going to move on to chapter 14. Okay. Let's read verses 1 through... let's actually read verses 6 of chapter 14 through 15. Then the children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know the word which the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the land, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought back word to him as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly followed the Lord my God. So Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land where your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance and your children's forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. And now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses while Israel wandered in the wilderness. And now here I am on this day, 85 years old. As yet I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in. Now therefore give me this mountain, of which the Lord spoke in that day. For you heard in that day how the Anakim were there, and the cities were great and fortified. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord said. And Joshua blessed him, and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, as an inheritance. Hebron therefore became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. And the name of Hebron formerly was Kirjath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. Then the land had rest for more. Okay, so who was the first to ask for their inheritance? JD. Caleb and Judah. Yep. So the children of Judah came to Joshua in Gilgal, and Caleb spoke up. Okay, Caleb is asking for a specific piece of the land. Judah is asking for their inheritance here. What portion of the land did Caleb request? JD.
The mountain, the land known as Hebron, or Hebron.
Yep. He had been there before, right? He had spied it out. This is the place that he was responsible for looking at. Or at least it was one of the areas that he saw. And he said, I want this place. And so Moses promised him that place. What was unique about this place? Laurie? The land of the Anakim. Why made this, I guess, ironic is the term we could use, unique? What was unusual about this request?
He's 85 years old now. He's, and he's still just as courageous as he was back then when he was 40. He's not scared of him.
He's not. He made that clear in Numbers 13 and 14 when the spies came back and said, there's giants. We can't beat them. Who spoke up? Caleb and Joshua. But it seems from the text that Caleb was the primary spokesman. Joshua agreed, but Caleb is the one who's saying, no, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And so Caleb here now says, we can still do this. And so he goes and does it, right? What can we learn from Caleb about this? What's some lessons for us?
Caleb was trusting the Lord throughout all of this, and I like this because it's like he's saying we have unfinished business. We're gonna finish this out. We're gonna follow through, and it's a great example of what faith in action looks like. It's leadership. It's following through. It's trust. It's knowing that God is going to provide. So giants are meant to be defeated. The fears that we have are meant to be destroyed by power of God.
his faith never wavered. And he's still just as focused to doing what God sent him to do as the day he first stepped foot 45 years ago. Yeah, Miles.
Well, we often talk about how strong his faith was when he was a spy, but just from learning from older Christians over the years, it just seems like the more you've seen, the more you look back and it's like, yeah, God saved me here, God saved me here, God brought me here. And so I almost think, like, you know, in a sense, his body, well, he's saying his body is the same. Like, he hasn't really gotten weaker or anything like that, but he's just seen, if he had that much faith at 40 when he was a spy, then he would have seen much more, and it would have only bolstered that faith in the years.
Yeah. He says specifically in verse 10, the Lord has kept me alive so that he can fulfill his promise. Yeah, his faith is getting stronger. He's seen a lot more in these last 45 years. All the things he saw in the wilderness, the last 7 years of fighting, he's still eager to go. He's still eager to do it. Stephen?
He wasn't afraid or timid or, I guess, he didn't lack the courage to actually expect what was promised to him. And it didn't seem like he didn't think that was selfish or, you know, self-centered. He said, hey, God, they promised it to me. This is mine. And it's okay that I'm getting this as my land.
Yep. He's willing to ask for what he's been told he can have. Yeah, and he's not timid about it. You're right, JD.
And to play on to all of these points, it just shows that no, it doesn't matter how old you are, how many centuries you may walk the earth, God willing, but as long as God is on your side, you can take any hill, conquer any mountain. The giants will tremble before the grasshoppers in this circumstance.
Is there any retiring from the work of God? No. Always. Until you die, the expectation is you serve and you follow him. Caleb understood that age is not a factor when it came to his faith, right? He didn't consider himself too old to be useful or to work in his faith. Just like no younger person should ever be discounted from their responsibilities or what they can do for God, right? He was willing to take the hard land, and he was willing to be about the business of God regardless of his age or his status or any of those sorts of other things. He was willing to work hard for God because God had done so much for him, and he was willing to do it. Ben?
You mentioned earlier in class how when they didn't have a leader, the people kind of went their own ways, and Caleb is one of the exceptions. You know, his leader was the Lord throughout it all. Yeah,
he was willing to follow God anywhere, even to those mountains where the giants were. And we know they were still there, or they came back. Chapter 15 and verse 14, Caleb drove out the 3 sons of Anak from there, and then it gives some names that I'm not going to try to say right now. And they went up there to inhabit the inhabitants of Debir, and they continue to fight, and he's encouraging people to go out and battle. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, took the city of Debir, and then as a reward, he got Caleb's daughter as wife. And so he's out there, he's fighting, but he's also encouraging others to continue to follow his example and do their job too. And so he's not just leading, he's leading, encouraging, and helping. It's not just, I'm going to do the job. We're going to do the job together, as we see that in Joshua, in Caleb.
He could have said, I've done it before, I can do it again, right? That would have been the easy answer. But instead, in verse 12, perhaps the Lord will be with me. That's his first clause on this, before he says, and I shall drive them out as the Lord has spoken. So full confidence in the Lord again. If the Lord's on his side, he knows he can do it. But he took no credit to himself.
No, he's out there just saying God's doing this and leading us, as Joshua has up to this point too. Okay.
We also see the impact of that leadership later. The Judahites are a lot more successful in expelling the other nations than the other tribes, and then, based on his example and him encouraging others, and specifically Othniel here then becomes the first listed judge.
Yeah, he's encouraging. His influence is widespread throughout his tribe. Okay, so this is the tribe of Judah. as it was given initially in these chapters, in chapter 15. There's a lot of cities that are listed here. Hebron would be the city that Caleb claims. There's a lot of other ones. We're not going to list them all, but you see here I've listed some. A lot of these are going to be along the coast because they're in the territory of the Philistines. So this was the area that Judah had the responsibility of driving out, and then some various other places as well. This was choice land. It had natural boundaries. There's a desert down here. There's an ocean on this side. There's a Dead Sea on this side. It's really only exposed on the north to invaders, which is where other tribes would, of course, settle. The blessings of Jacob in Genesis 14 speaks to the importance of the vineyards and the good land that would become key to this land. There was a lot of vineyards that were going to be here. A lot of agriculture is going to be in this area as well. And of course, as we talked about, this was the land of leadership because eventually David came from this and became the land of David as well. Ephraim is given, or rather, let's back up. So the territory of Joseph is given next in chapter 16. The lot fell next to the children of Joseph. And so the land of where Ephraim and the rest of Manasseh was given as a whole and then subdivided into Ephraim and Manasseh. And so we see that this land that they're going to receive was really good choice land. It was some of the most fertile, well-watered territory in all of the land itself. It's going to be in the central parts of the land, lots of water. The hills are less high, far less barren than some of those hills down in Judah or further to the north. And so it's really good land for them. Ephraim was given their allotment first. It's going to be here north of Judah a little bit. There's a buffer zone here where Dan and Benjamin will eventually settle. And there's going to be a number of cities, Shiloh being one of those, which we know became a key worship place in the days of the tabernacle, and then Bethel and Gezer and a number of these other places. Manasseh was just to the north of that. This land was a little bit more hilly than Ephraim, but still really, really nice land. Shechem was there, which is where the place where the blessings and cursings was given back in chapter 8, and then some other cities here are listed as well. We do see in chapter 17 there's a complaint amongst the children of Joseph about the land they got. We talked a little bit about it already. What is that complaint they have? It's not enough. We are, what do they say here? Why have you given us only one lot and one share to inherit? That's what we're talking about. It was given initially as a one single allotment. When we are a great people, inasmuch as the Lord has blessed us until now, they received really good choice land, some of the best land in all of the territories, but they're complaining, saying it's enough. How does Joshua respond to this?
He says, if you're so great, go out and conquer more.
Yeah.
Take care of the forest land.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's a lot of forest land. There's also a lot of Canaanites still left. That's really what they're complaining about, is that we have this land, but there's other people here. We want more land that's just by ourselves. Joshua's saying, look, the battle's not over. Your job's not done. Go take care of it. And then you can settle in that land too. Clear out the forest. Clear out the Canaanites. Were they pleased with that answer? No. It really shows us that, well, we didn't talk about this, but the land is being settled by lot. Who's designating that lot? God. And so who are they arguing with? Is it Joshua? No. God has given them this land, and his expectation was they took it. And they're arguing here against that. That is where we are going to stop today. We got through the tribes. There are a couple questions we didn't get through, but I think we're going to skip over those and just launch into the allotments next week in chapter 18 with the remaining tribes. Any last comment or question before we close? JD.
With the comparison between the people's faith and Caleb's faith is for the people, they were given what they were promised, and it wasn't enough for them. Caleb was granted what he was promised, and I'd wager that to him personally it was probably more than enough.
Yeah, Caleb is willing to go to great lengths to occupy what he's been given and be content with it. And the people, unfortunately, weren't. Okay, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you all so much.